Nice to see everyone. Welcome to Artists Now. The weather could not stop you, right? Our motto is art or death. Nothing will stop us from coming to see interesting, engaging, and thought-provoking art, which tonight seems to anticipate to be a very special event. So, at any rate, let me hype up next week, because we've got really a full schedule this semester, which is just excellent. So, next week, presenting is Mark Wagner, and the description of his work is as follows. Wagner's collages uses American currency as his medium, creating beautifully crafted images and objects from fragments of money. He will discuss the nature of money, economics, and currency as revealed through the act of destroying money to make art. Sounds great. And just so you know, after his lecture, he's going to give Oz money to me. I'm not joking. It's going to be, that's the bonus. So, I'm a little loopy today. So anyway, let's have a thought-provoking discussion. That's one of the best things about this lecture series is the questions from you folks. The dialogue that emerges either during the lecture or after, which I didn't note to our guests. The floor is yours, so you're more welcome to take questions after the lecture or during it. So at any rate, Nathaniel Stern is the host of our guest night, and he will give the introduction.
You're gonna click on. So, hi everybody, you might remember being introduced to the runner, the first guest artist we had earlier this year, Lauren Nover. It's my absolute pleasure to introduce South African-born and New York-based sculptor, printmaker, painter, drawer, illustrator, installation artist, etc., Sean Slemon. I've been a fan of his work for a number of years. I actually own 2 of his pieces in my own personal collection, so I am invested in making him very famous. His CV includes things like winning the most prestigious prize for emerging contemporary artists in all of South Africa, his upcoming second solo show with a fantastic gallery based in New York City in the heart of Chelsea, a huge open plan, beautiful space, and the list goes on. But I thought it might be more interesting to talk about the first time we met. I think it was about 7 years ago in Johannesburg, although the problem is I don't actually remember it, because I didn't find Sean to be that memorable at all. We might have met a couple times, actually, and his name, his face, you know, the things he said just didn't really ring a bell. But then, a number of months later, I met his girlfriend, a fellow New Yorker, who is now his wife, and she told me how brilliant she thought my show at the Johannesburg Art Museum was, and I thought, well, now this guy, you know, must be onto something to have a girlfriend with such impeccable taste. And so I watched as Sean Slemon started his career being paid to hang shows of other better-known artists, such as myself, but then quickly surpass all of us to have quite an amazing career, and it's been an amazing, wonderful spectacle to watch. I'm a huge fan, so I hope you enjoy his work as much as I do. Sean Slemon.
Hi everyone, how are you? Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for that very eloquent introduction. So kind of you.
Anytime, I'm waiting for the MoMA show.
So, I just have to say you have a wonderful, wonderful faculty here in the Fine Arts Department. It's full of great people. Even though you feel like you might be in a small town, that's not the case. It's just well done, and you're in the right place. I'm very proud and honored to be here. So, as he said, I'm South African. I grew up in Cape Town. Just to give you a bit of background, my family's of Irish heritage. They moved to South Africa in the mid-70s, and with my siblings in tow. And my dad was a theatre director in Cape Town at the Baxter Theatre. My mother was a potter. She made ceramics and pots and sculpture and that sort of thing. and that's kind of got me started. I spent a lot of time in the garage sitting around making Pinocchios and very tall noses that fell over. So there's all my family is still in Cape Town, and as Nathaniel said, I moved to New York in 2005. And my lecture is just going to start chronologically from my final work in my undergraduate degree in Cape Town, and I'll bring you through to where we're at today. So, and this slide, by the way, is just a piece that I just finished recently. It's going towards my solo exhibition at Magnan Metz, entitled The Sun Stands Still. So, and please feel free to stop if you have any questions. So this piece is one of the major pieces from my final undergraduate exhibition. It's a composite sculpture of stack laminated plywood that gets carved out using a power tool called an Architect. But the sculpture is based on a project called The Visible Human Male that was done in, I think, the early 90s in California, maybe. And what they did is they sliced up an entire human body. His name was James Paul Jernigan. He was a death row inmate, and he donated his body to medical science. And I used all of these slices, some 200 or 300, to rebuild him and give him a second life, and in various forms and materials. And then I started to play with him, and twist the shapes and distort his body and that kind of thing. You can see his very short brother next to him here. And I built him out of foam, I built him out of steel, I built him out of plexiglass, all that kind of thing. And the really interesting thing about this whole project was that I had no idea what these sculptures would look like when they were finished, because I didn't know what he looked like. I was just relying on these shapes and stack laminating them back together. And that kind of, I may see it now looking back, but it kind of laid the groundwork for a lot of the work that I came to produce later on. So, 2001, I get out of art school and I enter a competition with a piece that I had made in my final year as well, and it's the Spear Wine Farm Outdoor Sculpture Biennial, which no longer exists. Biennials in South Africa tend to last about 1 year. Funding peters out, everyone loses interest. Things don't last long, but everyone gets really excited about them and gets really involved, and then they just, the second year never comes. So this has happened several times. But this piece was entitled Head. It's again stack laminated marine ply, and it's about 4.5 to 5 feet high at the highest point. And it was great for kids. They could run in and out and play. It was kind of a jungle gym. Also one of my first outdoor pieces. And this was when and I still do have in mind to long term in my career be making and involved in public sculpture and public work. After that, I met a guy by the name of Clive Vandenberg, who is an extremely well-known South African artist and has a very diverse career. And he hired me as an exhibitions manager for a project that he was working on in Kimberley, which is in the dead center of South Africa, very famous for diamond mining. And the African National Congress, the ruling party, were building their new legislature buildings there. And he hired me to, this was a government like Department of Arts and Culture project, so there was a lot of development, and it was a 12-month contract, living in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by people that speak only Afrikaans, which I suddenly had to learn again. I realized I didn't pay any attention at school. And so I learned that very quickly, and what we were doing, we had about 15 or 20 people, school kids, guys up to the age of 40, whatever, but had no previous arts experience. We got a group of them together through the Department of Arts and Culture and trained them and taught them how to build mosaics and do cast concrete work. And we did there were a series of 7 buildings altogether. It's called the Kimberley Legislature Buildings, if you ever want to look it up online. I think there are some images. And Clive Vandenberg did all the design and decor, and we worked together with the students to produce these murals and mosaics and sculptural objects that spoke with the buildings. We did cast aluminum door handles, we did cast bronze and brass inlays in the floor. On the lower picture, these are cast concrete and then mosaic objects that just are used as pixels to create a picture. And all the silver sections you see there are cast aluminum objects of memory that just hang off his body, very much in the style of Clive's work, and just great stuff. But it was such an exciting project to be involved in at the time with the development of the country. Right after that, I ended up moving to Johannesburg. This is now 2003. Clive brought me on to a project called the Constitution Hill. And this was an old prison that was being converted into a human rights museum directly adjacent to the Constitutional Court in Johannesburg. And I'm speaking about these projects just not only because I was involved with them, but I think they're important in the trajectory of my career and what information I deal with, and you'll see this shortly. And this was, so this museum, the image on the left was based on human rights, and essentially it followed a series of prisoners through the museum and their experience and that kind of thing. And then on the right, obviously Nelson Mandela. I was involved with the Nelson Mandela Foundation, who were for the first time producing an exhibition of the letters he had written while he was in prison on Robben Island. And this was quite a big deal at the time. A lot of these letters had never been seen, and it was a real honor to work on such an exhibition. And very luckily got to meet the amazing man as well. So at this time, I'm still working as an exhibitions manager at Constitution Hill. I was in charge of getting the exhibitions up and running and installed, and I kind of reached a point where I was comfortable in Joburg. I was able to get a studio for the first time of my own. I was able to get an assistant, a fantastic Zimbabwean guy, and I had formed enough of a network after a couple of years to begin to know who to speak to about making a show and having a gallery exhibition. And there was a gallery called The Premises run by Stephen Hobbs and Marcus Neustaedter, and I went to them with a proposal to install a piece which you see here called Uplift the Mountain Premises, which was, the idea behind the sculpture was that the shape of the gallery created its own sculpture. And so I took layers of uplifted carpet and recycled carpet and offcuts and laid them down in layers and layers and layers, creating this contour map covering the entire floor of the gallery. And what this did was really interesting to kind of watch it as a performative piece, watch how the people interacted with the work. It became a real kind of socially engaging thing. People would just collect in the space. It was the middle of winter, so it was super warm to be sitting around in all this really warm carpet. And then there were also people who just stood at the door and wouldn't walk on it. You know, they were like, I can't get in. So just some close-up shots of it. And this this exhibition sort of set the tone for a lot of my other work in that I made other objects around a singular installation. I made a maquette, which this is a piece that ended up winning an award. And then I also produced a series of drawings and etchings as well, which seem to be the only things that ever sell, which is great. In that same year, 2005, I had a second show with the same gallery called Joburg 1 to 11, and this was this show had one central sculpture, and this again stack laminated plywood. But I built essentially remapped the city of Johannesburg. It has 11 regions, and I remapped the city according to population density. So I did away with the original contour, converting each region into its own mountain, in the same way that Uplift the Mountain Premises made its own mountain. I saw the mountain as kind of a demographic landmass, a diplomatic landmass, sorry, that distributed population in very specific ways, and that really interested me. But more importantly here, you can see the lower regions are much, much higher mountains, and obviously indicating a higher population density. Well, there's the black neighborhoods of Johannesburg, Soweto, and Deep Kloof, and then up in the north at the top, you see all the lower mountains, which are the much lower population densities. And this piece has subsequently been shown at many, many group shows. It seems to go all over the place. So then I moved to New York, and Hurricane Katrina happened right away. And I was kind of blown away by this. I was really affected by watching this happen, and just the onslaught of media that you have in this country is kind of overwhelming sometimes if you've never been able to see it as a first timer. And watching this whole thing play out on TV and people reacting, and then 3 weeks later it's like over, disappeared, gone, never happened, everyone forgets about it. But the important thing that got me thinking about Hurricane Katrina was the way it showed the gap between poor and rich in this country, and how if you had money, you were fine, you could get out, you could make a plan, you could get a car, someone would come and get you. But if you had no family, no money, no car, you waited it out and you got stuck, and you possibly got arrested for fighting for food or whatever the situation was. You all know how that whole thing went down. And I produced a show at David Critt called Katrina and the 5 Boroughs, and what I did is I kind of looked at how New York City would be affected if such a thing occurred there. And I remapped the 5 boroughs of New York according to population living below the poverty line. And you can see in the right-hand drawing of the island of Manhattan, the areas in white are all areas of population that are living below the poverty line. And I found that in New York, poverty is often quite hidden. People still might be living in houses or apartments or whatever, but your measure of poverty is vastly different, of course, to what it might be in South Africa. And then so during this time I was doing my master's degree at Pratt Institute. I came here as an international student, and this is my final show, my MFA show at Pratt. The title of the exhibition is Non-Exclusive, and this sort of indicates my transfer of the site specificity of how I work. You saw in Johannesburg in those shows I was working very much with Johannesburg, with the space, and when I moved to New York I kind of had to reconfigure that and get a sense of my surroundings and begin that similar work again. A lot of the work in Johannesburg is, the roots of it are social, and the roots of it are toward an analysis of social equality or a lack thereof. And I had to kind of reconfigure that and find a new way of approaching those issues that were important to me. And the way that I did this was through natural resources that came to be really, it was just so stark to me in New York how, like, the availability of street trees and sunlight and public space was this, they came to be sort of a social battleground for many things. And so I ended up using those as the roots of a lot of the work that I produce now. And I'm still very much working with those same ideas today. And here you see 3 sculptures that make up the exhibition. It was very minimal, very clean. I'll just give you some close-up shots. This is called a sidewalk paving block. This is basically a replication of you know how the sidewalks are sort of cut up into sections so the concrete doesn't crack too much. But what I did is I produced a laser-cut steel drawing of a building that is in downtown Manhattan called the Equitable Building. And this building is really famous for the 1912 building zoning rules, which demarcate that when a building rises up to whatever height it might be, but every 3 stories it's got to stack back from the street. And this is what gives you this typical New York skyline of buildings stacking in. And the reason for that was to allow more light down to the streets. The Equitable Building was a big, gigantic, square monolith of a box. And it just went straight up. And there was a huge public outcry at the time. People would just riot in the streets, and they were like, "You've taken all our sunshine away." And essentially cast several neighborhoods in complete shadow during the day. That's what resulted in this 1912 zoning law. So the significance in this piece is this sidewalk paving block, and then in the center you see the outline of the Equitable Building is cut in mild steel with the intention that it would eventually just melt away, it would rust away and disappear, and you'd just be left with a shadow of that over time. And then I made a piece called Solid Light. Essentially, light beams made solid, light turned into commodity. You always hear this phrase, oh, look at the light in this apartment, it's just amazing. This apartment is worth so much more on the south side of the building than the one that's on the north side of the building, just because it gets fantastic sunlight. And this is a real thing. Sunlight's become an asset in real estate, and it's become a commodity for people, and people chase after it. And there have been many psychological studies that prove that we're much, much happier when we get a lot of sunlight. And as I'm sure you know here with your extremely long, tough winters. Which I'm sorry I'll be missing. This piece was really successful, and I went on to make more that you'll see shortly. And it's based on a brownstone-sized window, so about 4 feet high by 2 feet wide. And essentially, these beams, I built this sculpture in AutoCAD first, and then in a 3D program, I rendered it in Rhino, and then broke the pieces down to give me construction drawings. But of course, what I did first was measure the window down to the ground and then traced the sunbeams on the floor during the day in our apartment. And that formed the physical basis for the sculpture.
What's the material?
It's made of half-inch thick construction plywood. It's also important to me that a lot of the sculptures are made from construction materials, because I feel that I'm kind of recycling these materials back in. I'm playing with the idea of these ideas of construction and working these materials back into things that negate construction and maybe challenge it in some way. And like the concrete piece, and then this is a street tree. And this is a piece that's made from a lot of found plywood that I found in dumpsters, like on the way home from class and that kind of thing. And what I did was I modeled it on a very popular street tree called the Calorie Pear. And this Calorie Pear tree is kind of interesting. It's developed sort of a suicide mission as a result of the lack of direct sunlight. The Calorie Pear has what's called a central leader that goes straight up the middle of the tree. And essentially gives the crown of the tree a lot of strength. And what happened, because of the lack of direct sunlight, it lost its central leader, so it just wouldn't develop one. It would develop its crown as normal though, and eventually after time the tree would just split down the center, dying when it had reached like a mature age and the crown was good and heavy. And I was kind of fascinated by this idea of the tree killing itself as a result of natural light. So what I did was build the tree in such a way that it ran straight up to the ceiling, giving the illusion that it ran through the entire building. This is a 10-story building or whatever at Pratt on the campus. Ironically, my mother-in-law got hit on the head by this piece because it fell over at the show. So I built it very differently when I reinstalled it. She's fine. She thought it was funny too. She still loves it. Just a couple more pieces that I was making while I was at Pratt. I did a lot of, I just used my graduate degree to kind of experiment and make as much work as I could, which I have encouraged everyone who I had studio visits to do studio visits with as well. Just experiment and don't worry too much about the direction. I mean, you sure produce a cohesive body of work, but do other stuff that you think you might not normally make. This is a sculpture of Manhattan, stack laminated plywood. And then in the bottom there, you see a sunken street tree. And this is an idea that I have for a public outdoor piece where a tree in Battery Park City gets submerged below ground level. It's kind of a real engineering problem. I've got like all sorts of ideas of how to do it. But you would take an existing tree, undermine the ground beneath it, and let it sink down. And then you would have this kind of special place where you could be alone with the tree. You see a set of stairs going down. This is a silk screen. And over time, the tree would grow out of the space, and the crown would exist at eye level with you on the ground. I've spoken to some arborists about this, and some say you're crazy, and some say this would be great. Just depends who you get. It's what mood you're in, what time of day it is. So this is one of the very few video pieces I've made. I graduated from Pratt and I got accepted into a really amazing residency called the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture. And all of you should apply. It's one of the best things I've ever done. I can't say enough good things about it. They have an excellent program, they're incredibly supportive. And it's just an all-around great experience. It's 9 weeks, 65 people. They only look at your work, they don't read your statement, they don't read your name, they don't look at where you're from. And it's pretty well funded too. So I proceeded to be quite experimental here and just, this is a stop motion animation. I was able to get a diseased elm tree and take it inside a studio space and put a tarp behind it. And I started shooting at night, and it took me about a week to pick all the leaves off, just a couple at a time, shoot a photograph, pick more, shoot a photograph, until the tree was completely gone. I took the entire thing apart. And I kept all the pieces, and I ended up reconstituting the tree into several other works, so it had quite a few lives. And in my opinion, I think the other works are more successful than the video, and I've since decided that I'm just not a video editor, and I'd rather pay someone to do it for me, like Nathaniel.
Oh, how the tables have turned.
I had to get that in. So, it's a little slow. Sorry. I think it's just taking time to get to the next slide. Thanks, Steve. So this is what the tree ended up becoming. I called the piece public property, based on the idea that this tree is something that belongs to everyone, and that it's also the kind of object that we all benefit from. And on the left is a series of 10 still images that form a single photographic print, and on the right is a sculpture, which is about 36 by 72. It's exactly my dimensions. I built a plexiglass case that's completely sealed, and the tree is simply stacked inside that case from top to bottom. And of course, over time, the leaves are biodegraded. They're already about 2 inches below the top where they are. And a lot of people love this work, but then they're like, well, if I buy it, it's just going to biodegrade. So it's going to change. And that's the point. It's a changing work. It's not meant to be static. It's meant to evolve and change with the time. And I'm actually in the process right now, sorry I don't have any shots of it, but I'm building a much bigger one, which is entitled Goods for Me. And it's a 12-foot wide by 8-foot high by 20-inch deep series of cases that are kind of brick-like in orientation, horizontal, similar in size to this, 72 by 36, but it's a much, much bigger tree. It was like a 30 or so foot each tree that fell down in our backyard about 3 months ago, and I've taken that entire tree apart quite obsessively with the help of many friends, and I'm just waiting to install it into the cases shortly. And this is the same tree. Midway before taking the rest of the piece apart, I produced this piece, which is called Tied Up, Tied Down. It was this kind of playing with the ambiguity of whether the tree was being held back or whether it was being protected, and using hazard tape to do so. In 2009, I received an opportunity to participate in a group exhibition in Siena. It was an institution called the Palazzo della Borghese, which is created by Lorenzo Fussi, and he was he has been developing a relationship with South Africa for quite some time. He felt, however, he didn't know enough about it, so he asked 5 contemporary mid-career South African artists to choose 3 emerging artists, and I was lucky enough through an artist by the name of Bernie Searle to get a place on this show and produce this piece. A newer version, of course, of the previous Uplift, the premises. This was called Uplift the Palazzo della Borghese, and just had a lot more time and money to produce a much better work. Again, site-specific installation, I signed a piece of paper at the end of the show saying they can throw it away and it just exists as a photograph in the memory now, which is okay. This was a piece from my first solo show with Magnin Metz, what used to be Magnin Projects. They had an exhibition space on 29th and 10th on the west side of Chelsea in Manhattan. This piece is called Crosslight. It's all stained half-inch plywood. And it's about 45 feet long, 9 feet high, and 2 feet wide. And you'll see more. This was another iteration of this cast cement, cast concrete block. I made 2 versions of these for this show. We hired a concrete cutting saw and went out in the middle of the night and installed one of them in the sidewalk illegally, which I don't recommend. We looked at getting permits and it just seemed like too much trouble, so. And you know, New York is amazing. No one batted an eyelid. We were like streaming dust up into the air, and people were just like, you just put on a yellow vest and you're like, oh, they're just doing some road work, whatever. And that piece, is still there, since even though they've moved to their new gallery space. But what's going on in this piece is every block in the city has a number. The title of the show is Block 700. Again, site-specifically working. And what's important to note here are the silver trees along the top that were the existing street trees on that site. And I've started this project where I'm kind of trying to map the potential space for trees in New York City, which of course the Million Trees is taking care of. Bloomberg is running this project called Million Trees NYC, and I think just today they planted the 500,000th tree. And the bronze trees that you see here are the potential sites for future street trees that are placed according to the city's guidelines. So you have to be like 15 feet from a fire hydrant, 12 feet from a curb, all that kind of thing. And also what you see here, this big bar through the center, is the High Line, and that wiggly line is an old farm line. I use the Sanborn maps that are kind of the most complete maps of New York City. They're available in the libraries there.
You won't know what the High Line is?
Oh, the High Line is incredible. It's one of the best public parks that has been recently built. I think it's the best thing New York City's built in the last 10 years, easily. It is an old elevated railway that was defunct on the west side of Chelsea for years and years. And Dinner, Scofidio, and Renfro, a fantastic group of architects, partnered with the city and a private organization called the High Line. What's their full name? I don't recall. But they converted this entire elevated railway into a public park. And every second block there's a stairway that allows you to access it. People use it. Runs from West 12th Street on the west side of the city all the way up to 39th Street. So it's like 28 blocks long around there. And I think they're still even extending it more. It has 3 phases. I think they've only just at the beginning of this summer they opened phase 2. They're just an amazing group of architects. They have a great website as well, by the way, just a fantastic resource. They're really artists that happen to work with buildings. And they say so themselves. I just went to a talk of theirs about 3 weeks ago. So I wanted to include that because the High Line was just getting started at the time and there was a lot of buzz about it when I made this piece. As I do with most of my projects, I make preparatory drawings. I use the construction of the sculpture to kind of inform the drawing. This is called Crosslight. It's made of cement. And I use the cement to create layers and build texture, and working with fixative to kind of create an image of the sculpture. And these drawings are important because they allow me to get a sense of how the construction works and sort of meditate and think on that piece while I'm doing the drawing. And I always feel more informed for it when I actually get to making the final piece. And I did a series of these. These are all again on construction materials. The top one is red light. It's made of that red construction chalk that people use on sites for marking lines. And the bottom one is charcoal and chalk. It kind of indicates a halfway point of the construction. construction of the piece. So, I don't make any money. I mean, this is probably the most money I've made as an artist in, like, I don't know, 5 years. Coming to talk here and give workshops and that kind of thing. I work as an assistant for other artists that are much more famous than I am and that have a lot more money. And that is great, and it can also drive you crazy. But the great thing about it is that you learn a lot doing it. And so I have I was working as I worked as a bartender for 2 years on weekends, Fridays and Saturdays, great nights, lots of money. Really, really lucrative, tax-free, cash in hand. I built in closets on the top left. I build crates for galleries in the middle. I build sculpture for other artists on the top right. I fabricate upholstery for a jewelry store. And in the middle on the bottom, you can see us installing a show for an artist named Rachel Feinstein at the Lever House. She recently got a Lever House commission. Really great opportunity. And I made an award for the CFDA Fashion Week. So you've just got to get in there and do stuff and make it happen. And I also am on a daily basis indebted to my wife, who has a great amount of support in what I do and has allowed me to take off the next 3 months so I can make my show. And that helps. So, but and then straight after the show is finished, I'm back to work for Rachel. And I'm going to be helping her with her new work. So even though I've got a career that now spans 10 years and I have a gallery that represents me, and I'm doing my second solo show with them, and I'm doing a residency in South Africa, and I'm giving artist talks, I'm not going out for dinners and partying it up every night like Damien Hirst, that's for sure. So, and that's just the way it is, you know, if you're going to do this, you're not going to make a lot of money, and it's going to be really tough work for quite a few years. And there are, you know, you always hear these artists who've been just knocking away at this for like 30 years, and a lot of them work in academia, and a lot of them do what I do and work as assistants for other artists, and that's just what you need to do to make it happen. You're not in this for the parties and the diamonds. So, and another thing that I'm doing, and I just thought I'd stick this slide in, and at the risk of some shameless self-promotion, there is, I was nominated by a friend of mine who received USA Artists Fellowship, and she was able to nominate some people to participate in this website called USA Artists, where you can run what is basically a Kickstarter project. And I am currently raising money to produce the new work for my exhibition and produce a catalog and hire a PR person and that kind of thing. Hiring the PR person is a total weird thing for me to do, but it's the first time, and I met someone, we got talking, and now we're doing it. And I don't know if it's going to work yet or not, or if it's going to do anything. We'll see. But the USA Artist thing is, it's almost funded. It's close to my $8,000 goal, and if I don't reach it, I don't get anything. So, but it's just, I wanted to put this in so that you can see another way that you can make something happen. And you don't have to be an artist to do USA projects. You can be a writer, you can be a performer, you can be an illustrator, you can do all sorts of things. Just as I'm sure you all know and have run through the Kickstarter website, there are amazing things on that site that you would never think would get funded. And people get in there and give them $5. And it's just so inspiring because it's community-based fundraising. So some of these pieces will be on my current show. I think from here on out it's all new work. This is, the piece on the left is called In the Red and in the Black, and it was kind of inspired by the financial crisis. It's this street tree, which of course is an object of value to me and to many people, but it's been covered in gold leaf, so it's even more endowed with this importance, and then suspended by gold and black ribbons. red and black ribbons. And the tree is in this weird state of suspension where it's not suspended from above, it's suspended from the left and the right. So there's this it could tip at any moment feeling to the whole situation, where on the right, the root ball is attached to the black lines that run over to the left, and the opposite with the crown of the tree to the red running over to the right. And I've started this thing of building these installations in my studio, and not necessarily showing them, but just having them exist as a photographic print. This is an edition of 5, and I plan to do many more. And it's great because you can be experimental, and you can be immediate, and you can reconstitute things and play around a bit. And it's a lot of fun to make, and it's a lot more practical because you don't have to move this installation around, and they work and kind of have a second life beyond that. And this work also became another piece on the right, another tree in a case, which I've entitled Stock. I participate in a couple of group shows every now and then, often, and this was for a very little-known group show that was really badly organized retrospectively, but it was called Escape from New York. It was in Patterson, New Jersey, and I basically traced the sunlight for an entire day through these windows, and then from those marks on the floor, tied those lines back to the windows. And this is made using that sort of stretchable hazard tape that gets used at building sites and construction roads. I also am constantly applying to places like the Public Art Fund and Creative Time and various other institutions for public art proposals. And this was a proposal. This is a Photoshop rendering. I didn't get to build this. I am going to build it in South Africa next year in May at a place called the Narox Foundation. I'm doing a 6-week residency there. But essentially what this is are very delicate lines that run down from the winter trees to try and activate the park into a sort of a series of autumnal colors and sort of just change the space and the atmosphere. Very simple project, not trying to say anything grand, just working with the trees in an aesthetic way. I built another version of this piece in Johannesburg in 2010 at a gallery called Brody Stevenson, which has now just become Stevenson Contemporary. This was a much bigger tree. It was like a 25-foot tall tree that I got in South Africa and worked on in gold leaf there, and again suspended in the gallery space. This piece was part of that same show. It was sort of a reference to South African tree schools. There's this unique thing that happens where in very poor rural areas, the schools just don't have any buildings, and they end up literally having their school under a tree during the day in the summer. And it was this kind of absurd, this drawing was kind of an absurd third world reaction to a third world problem of, oh, well, if we're going to have tree schools and we need more schools, let's just make the trees bigger. So I drew this acacia in a much like expanding the canopy. It was just, it was kind of a funny piece for me, but also very tongue-in-cheek, but dealing with a very serious problem. This is made using soil from a street tree in New York City, drawing a tree in South Africa, using polyurethane and soil, and just in quite an additive way. And it's big, it's like 96 inches by 32, so fairly large. Another piece along the same lines, more of a preparatory drawing for the sculpture you saw previously, where I did a pencil drawing of that same tree, and then outlined it using cement and soil watercolor to indicate the lines, and then at the end of the drawing just erasing the tree and getting rid of it altogether, becoming a little bit abstract. This is the piece you saw in the beginning. It's a sculpture of my shadow, and I'm making sculptures of shadows because, again, it's this ethereal thing that can't be owned, that can't be possessed, and making it solid is this action of creating a commodity that you normally just don't get, which is the same approach as the solid life pieces have for me as well. And here I'll just speak about a little bit of the processes behind making these sculptures. Arborism I've been working with for about 2 years, and both with my own work and other artists as well, and it's just a great flexible material. It's essentially a very basic sort of the first people that ever made sculpture and did sand casting. So it's kind of back to that in a weird way. I built a sand pit in my studio, And first I lie down in the sun, and with the shadow in mind that I want to make, I draw that shadow line on my body. So where that falls, that line gets drawn with a Sharpie. And then I get my wife to help me pack the sand around my body. And I make the sand very wet so it stays stiff and retains its shape when you get up out of it. And I use hydrocolor plaster to pour into that recess. This then, the positive of the shadow half of your body gets lifted out, and you can see here it just coming out of its being cast. And that piece just gets cleaned up. I remove all the sand, I fill in any areas that get maybe miscast with either clay or with more hydrocolor. And then I begin the process of making the negative of that. This is a positive, you're then making a negative, which becomes part of the final sculpture. You can see the clay wall here, and then the first sort of gel coats of the upper resin going in. And all these pieces get reassembled back together again to form the final piece. So now you see the shell on the left, which is essentially the negative of the left side of my body. And then I recreate the shadow that I had. This is from an early morning shadow, like 6:30 a.m., lying on the street, just replicating the length. And I just measure it all out and record those things, and then fake it again later on to get that correct shadow. That shadow gets eventually cut out in plywood, and the plywood is the section that will be on the floor. So here the pieces are being assembled in the studio, and the plywood section gets quite a strong framework built onto it, and then the pieces are cut out underneath. And then the sculpture is turned upside down, and you see the first lines in here of duct tape going in where the aqua resin will be painted to form the outline of the shadow. So on the left you see there that piece is kind of nearing completion. I use duct tape to stretch from the vertical shadow back to the horizontal one, and flip it over and paint those, and you get it up to about a 1/4 inch thick, and it's good and strong. And then on the right you can see the piece after it's had all the duct tape removed, and you can see what will be the final form. And that's just after it's been cleaned up, and from here it gets sanded down. You go through all the grades of sandpaper right up to 600 grit with the water paper, and then it gets polished with like a beeswax polish. And that's the final piece, which I just finished before I came. I shot it on Sunday. And that's it. Thank you. Questions, comments, anything? Yeah.
What sparked your interest in trees?
It was moving to New York and the sort of stark lack of trees in the city, and this lack of green space and that kind of thing. And it really, for me, also, I started looking at street trees more. I started studying them. I have plans to maybe one day produce a book about street trees in the city, but they're just such a marker for social equality for me. And you know how I was speaking about that social equality being a really important part of my work in South Africa, that kind of stuck out for me in New York City.
Absolutely.
Because it was a real subject of contention at the time, and still is in some ways. The tree is this thing that cannot be owned, yet the city own all the trees, and if you damage one, you get a fine. And it should be that way, but also trees are something that they can't just service one person, they service everyone. We all breathe the air that they clean for us. And they just have such a tough time in a place like New York City because of the concrete heat island effect, which kills many, many trees every year. The average lifespan of a tree there is like 7 to 12 years for a newly planted tree. And they're just this, it's kind of this amazing sort of resilience that they even are able to exist there at all. So they're sort of a stand-in for the human ethos, in a way. Yeah?
Why did you choose to keep the same color of the aqua resin?
There's a couple of reasons. I feel that sculpture has more integrity when it reflects the color of the materials that it's made from. And this piece kind of became, when I started finishing these pieces, initially I was planning to just make them black, jet black, like super glossy, like a car finish almost. I had bought all the spray equipment to do this, and when I finished them and polished them, I couldn't make myself do it. It was just such a seductive finish, and it's kind of marbly, and it's also very skin-like in its color as well, and I kind of like that about it. So, yeah. Yes?
I look at the sculptures, and I don't know if this is okay with you, but I find them both beautiful and funny at the same time.
Beautiful and funny. Yeah.
Is that
That's fine.
a wrong reading of it? Or?
Not at all. I think, the thing with artwork is people have many different ways of accessing it. My experience is different to yours. And I don't use this line as a cop-out. It's just, that's going to happen. It's
You
always
have a funny body.
Yeah. I mean, with the other one, the upright one, people find it very heavenly and shroud-like and that kind of thing. I've had all sorts of different comments from that, and that were not at all what I thought would happen. I think when you make work and you put it out there, it comes back with different results. You can always plan that. Yes.
For this piece, how big is it, and what material did you use? Was it the same process as
Exactly.
the body one?
Yeah, so it's based on the dimensions of my body. It's exactly 72 inches high. Now you'll know why. It's 26 by 36 in width and depth, and it's made of aqua resin, which is a water-based gypsum product that uses. It's a two-part resin. It's a powder liquid that uses fiberglass matting to bond and give strength.
Well, I'm happy that you didn't make it black. Taking away a lot of the meaning.
Yeah, that's what I've come to believe too. Thanks. Anyone else?
Go ahead first.
Yeah.
Have you always tried to focus on things that aren't owned by anybody, like sunlight or shadows or stuff like that?
Yeah, I think so, especially, well, at least in New York. I mean, even land, when I was working in South Africa, land can't be owned by, I mean, you can own it now, but the idea of owning it from a, the Xhosa tribe, for them, land ownership is such an absurd idea. It's like, as far as they were concerned, the land belonged to everyone. And then the Dutch came and they said, well, we're going to build a fence here, and you can't come inside. And they were like, what are you talking about? And it's the same with the tribal Indians in the US. I mean, they have much of the same kinds of arguments. So I guess in a way, that's a, yeah. That's a yes. Yes.
How heavy are these?
This one is particularly heavy because I made it too thick. You can lift them with two people. It's about 150, 180 pounds. It's essentially a 1/4 inch thick aqua resin shell, which then gets filled with a expanding urethane foam. This one specifically, I turned it upside down, cut a hole in the bottom of the hole saw, poured in 2 gallons of this casting foam, and let it expand, fill this shape, and then close up the hole. So, yeah. Yes?
Is there a significance that the shadow is your own, or is it simply that you're willing?
It's simply that I'm willing and I'm conveniently there. And I think that when you, and I'm busy making a 3rd one now, and also a 4th piece, which is a shadow of my arm. But the fact that it's my shadow isn't that important. If I had someone else that was there all the time, I would just use them. The important thing is that it's the shadow of a body. And it's something that we all have and we can all relate to. And that's what's more important to me. I don't necessarily want to have like a diverse group of people or anything like that. That doesn't, yeah. Yes?
Is this piece or pieces at all influenced by one of the first pieces that you showed of that prisoner that was cut up into different sections and all?
No.
I just like noticed that there was like a little bit of.
I think there's a similarity in form and the fact that I made it, but that piece didn't really interest me. I think that laid the groundwork for the later social work that came in.
Oh.
So they're linked through those ideas. Yeah. Socially conscious work. It's not social when it's in a room on its own and it's not doing anything. Yeah.
I was wondering if you could talk a bit more about the public art proposal that you mentioned you'll be building. And so.
Okay, yeah. So that slide of Prospect Park. Where is it gone? There. So essentially what happens here, and this came out of, sorry. This piece started it all. Tied down. And people have responded really well to this piece, and it's one of the few pieces that I have in my house. I don't keep much of my art at home. It's kind of makes me nervous. So that work will be, I'm going to do about 7 or 8 trees, and I'm basically going to buy specific colors, like autumnal colors of this nylon thread that will be elasticated, and each branch from the tree will kind of lead down to the ground and be pegged in. I'm going to be doing it in the beginning of winter, so it'll run for the show will be up for the five winter months or so before it'll come down just when the trees start blooming again. So I'm looking forward to making that. I'm going to have to like hire a cherry picker and all that stuff and climb trees and that kind of thing. So I'm pretty excited about it. I'm looking forward to it. I just need some money. But that's it. So, yeah. Anyone else? Yes.
When you begin a piece or an idea, do you ever, does it ever limit you? Well, I'm sure it doesn't, but does it ever limit you the fact that you're trying to think and create something that must be sold or not sold?
No. I actually think more in terms of physical convenience now. After making that really big piece, the plywood cross-light piece, I had like all the good intentions in the world to keep it and store it, and I did for 2 years, and eventually just went up one day and ripped the piece apart and threw it out in the dumpster. And I find now it's more important to try and make pieces that might be around for a little longer than that. But I do still enjoy the short lifespan that an installation will have for 6 months, and that it will exist maybe only in photographs. I don't think it's essential that all sculpture or artwork have long lifespans. I think there's still value in doing those things that just happens for a short amount of time. So it's more of a practical rather than a conceptual decision. Yeah.
Have you ever done any other work in Africa besides South Africa?
No, I haven't. I've visited
Why?
other. Why?
Yeah.
Because I just haven't been to those countries. I've been to Namibia and Botswana and Mozambique, but I haven't had a chance to do any work there. I went to Slemon. Yeah.
Actually, my question is kind of a follow-up to that. You talked about how your life is surviving and working as an artist in New York City.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about how it is to be an artist in South Africa?
You know, that's a great question, and it's actually a lot easier. So his question was, can you talk a bit about how it is to be an artist in South Africa? And he mentioned that I'd spoken a little bit about my survival as an artist in New York City. And when I moved here, it was a great shock because I just had this kind of rising career in South Africa, and I left at a really great time. I just had 2 summer shows in 1 year. I won an award. I was making some money. It was incredible. And then I got here, and I was small fish in a big sea, essentially. And I'm sure many of you have had the same experience moving to a different city. Suddenly, no one knows you, and you do a show and it doesn't get a write-up, it doesn't get a review, no one really cares, you know. But that was a good experience in some ways because it was really humbling and kind of knocked me down a bit, which I think I probably needed at the time. And I just got back to work and carried on and started making new stuff and finding, and I had to reconfigure, of course, my conceptual framework for the work I was making. But that was, I think, very, very healthy in many ways. But South Africa is a lot easier because the art world is a lot smaller. And it is, there is not as much money available, but everyone there works in another area. They work in academia, they work in exhibition production, and things are maybe a little cheaper somewhat, at least they used to be. And it's just easy because you're a bigger fish in a smaller sea. And the switch was significant. So, I mean, New York City, you're dealing with 5,000 artists, at least. You go to Chelsea and there's almost 350 galleries, and it's kind of absurd. And that's something else that I wanted to talk about. Like, I grew up in Cape Town, which is maybe a similarly sized city. I was talking with Nathaniel about this, to what Milwaukee is. Milwaukee is maybe a little smaller, but sometimes in a small city, it's easier to get stuff done and to make things happen and to be experimental and to do new stuff because you know more people. The bureaucracies are sometimes easier to manage and know your way of how to weave through them. And when you're in a place like this, don't knock it because it's a great city and you can get a lot more done and be a lot more productive. Just seeing how much work someone like Nathaniel has been able to do, as well as working as a professor at an academic institution, is just amazing because you have resources around you at your fingertips and you have lots of access to people. And this university is incredible. There's so much cross-pollination between all the disciplines. And that's something that few institutions do. So it's
Do you speak from your grad school experience?
Yeah, I do. I was at Pratt Institute and I was on the student graduate body. And we ended up having a huge fight with the faculty because we wanted them to do away with the fine art disciplines of painting, sculpture, printmaking, because none of the respective professors could even, like, sculpture guy couldn't talk about a painting and vice versa. So if we did away with those divisions, they would have been out of work, which was kind of what we wanted because we wanted to get new faculty in. There was one new guy who was there for 2 years and he got frustrated with it and left, and he's now at the new school and he's doing really well. And he, you know, he is the only guy that believed in my work and introduced me to this gallery, which is why I now show with him. It's often who you know, not necessarily what you're capable of doing, but sadly. But that's an important thing. I mean, that a school like this, you know, is able to encourage that kind of cross-pollination. So, let's use it. Yes?
Hi Sean, it's Jessica back
Hi,
there.
how are you?
I have a lot of printmaking students who are in the audience here, so thank you students for coming. And I'm just curious about, like, I see your sculptures and then being, you know, some of them with the trees and found, they sort of evolve as pieces, and then your drawings, I got to see the drawings of the Stevenson Gallery, and I just love the fact that parts of them were fixed, yet some of them will continue to evolve and drop down, and I love the, like, the sediment that would settle at the bottom of the frame, and, you know,
Yeah.
and I was wondering just where you see printmaking, I'm trying, like, where do you see that fit within the body of the work, of your work in terms of, like, the materials, or what, like, are you archiving your sketches, or is it the materials that you're using to create the prints that you're drawing to? Could you speak a little bit about that?
Sure, yeah. I'm concerned about how these pieces evolve, and I'm not, like with that particular piece you spoke of that's made of soil. I was taking a risk there. I didn't know how long it was going to stick to the page for. You know, in an ideal world of working at the Museum of Modern Art, I would have, like, gotten a consultant and found the best way to stick the soil on the page. But you can't always do that. And the flip side of it is that even if you're a printmaker and you're as archival as you want to be, eventually your print's going to turn to a piece of charcoal. So And I have plans to make works out of just solid cast charcoal. So I'm interested in that idea that everything will biodegrade and dissipate and essentially destroy itself like the calorifer tree. So, yeah. Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yes?
I actually have two questions for you. Thinking about the school tree and being able to have it underneath that canopy, do you see this upcoming project in the park as being able to walk amongst all those strings? Will there be space, or will it be so dense that you won't be able to walk near the trunks?
It depends on the tree, because what I'm doing is kind of applying a formula to this tree where the end of every single branch that can hold a string, that's strong enough to hold a piece of string, will get the piece of string. So I'm going to try and choose denser trees to make a greater visual impact, but that might not always be available. So the piece will change. You know, I was talking to one of the grad students in a studio visit, and they were telling me about an idea, and we didn't really know how it was going to look until we've made it. And you've just got to make it sometimes and see if it works. Because the idea on paper can be great, and then when you get to making it, it's a completely different story. But it's not, I don't see those two pieces as being related, no. The tied up trees or the tied down trees are more about the ambiguity of how we treat nature, how we engage with it, as opposed to that acacia and dead piece. So.
And I find it absolutely brilliant that you're giving a volume to the sunlight and making it a commodity. And I'm wondering if you've thought about other natural rhythms of the earth and giving them a volume, like wind or...
Yeah, I am interested in the migration of birds, and I've been working on an idea to try and figure out a way of making that a physical representation. So yeah, there are other ideas in the framework for that kind of thing. Yeah. So.
As always, feel free to come and talk to our guests for the next 15 minutes.